Good morning, it's Michelle Savage from Xbrl US here. You are here for our webinar, Xbrl Updates for Ferc Filers. Get ready now. I want to thank everybody for joining and just go through a few logistical points before we talk about what we're going to be addressing today. We are offering CPE credit for today's program. So if you signed up for CPE, or frankly, even if you didn't sign up for CPE, if you want to get it, please go ahead and respond to the poll questions that will be taken at 2 points during the session. If you do respond to the poll questions, we'll be able to get CPE credit out to you. For the program today, if you have any questions or concerns, any kind of technical issues, please email us at support@xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back online. And as we go through the program, feel free to post questions in the Q&A link that you see on your screen, and we'll take those questions through the program. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. First, we're going to focus on some updates on the Ferc taxonomy and historical filings. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has made a number of updates that we want to address. Next, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to check your filing, how to render your filing, and how to run various kinds of Ferc business rules and filer manual rules against your filing. And then we'll be talking a little bit about other tools. Our speaker today is Campbell Pride. Campbell is President and CEO of Xbrl US, and Campbell had a big role in helping the Ferc develop the taxonomy that you're going to be working with. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Campbell, who's going to take us through the program. Campbell?
Thank you, Michelle. So welcome everybody. And today we're just going to give you a couple of updates. And the first we'll just talk about is the updates on the Ferc taxonomy. The 2021 taxonomy is available, and that's what filers should be filing with. The Ferc is allowing people to file. So far, I don't think anyone has actually made an official filing yet, but if you need to, you can do that. And the 2021 taxonomy is available to do that. There are the taxonomy itself will not be changing. However, there are a number of outstanding little issues in some areas of the validation rules and the rendering, which has mainly been corrected. I know there's a couple of outstanding issues there. So if you run into those, you should let Ferc know that you've run into an issue with it. And specifically, just to give you an idea of what some of these have been and what have been resolved, and some of you probably commented on these, is there on some of the forms there were some issues with the cash flows and just in terms of the rendering and making sure the signs are the right way around. So generally now on this, if you should be able to take all those numbers based on the way they're rendered, you should be able to add them all up, and then you get the total for like the investing, the financing, and the operating sections. There are some items which have less, which in the historical forms was specifically saying you should deduct these. So everything should be consistent with that now. There was one issue that was raised, and generally the way that this works in the taxonomy and at the underlying Xbrl level is if an element has a debit balance in the cash flow, then that basically should be an increase in cash. If it has a credit balance, then it should be a decrease in cash. There was one element for financing and the adjustments for financing in the taxonomies that was used for both the Form 1 and the Form 2. However, in those two forms, that same element was treated differently. In the Form 1, it was deducted, and the Form 2, it was added. So there's a fix for that as well, which is probably going to come. That's one fix I know that's outstanding. So if you have other adjustments to financing and you haven't filed yet for the Form 1, just be aware of that issue is actually being resolved. It is a debit balance, so if it's a decrease in cash, it should be entered as a negative amount for now, even though it might not quite look right in the rendering. The underlying data would be correct. However, that is being corrected. So 2021 is basically being used for these quarterly filings, so they should be able to be filed. 2022 taxonomy for 2022 is being worked on. There's not much difference between the two taxonomies. The 2022 taxonomy just fixes a number of the bugs that were identified in the 2021. Fortunately, most of those bugs really affected schedules that were not required required for the quarterly filing. So those are being worked on, and so hopefully that can be released early in 2022, so that the annual filing can be used to file with that. And as I mentioned earlier, the number of changes that, it's not like there's additional schedules or anything like that. The only changes are going to basically fix some of the issues, particularly with things like units, so that you can use the latest units in the units registry. So this means in the past, in the 2021, there was some mistakes in the units. They had like a lowercase for a unit when it should have been an uppercase, or vice versa. I think it was for like, it only affects a single schedule on a form, but it would be like mega, volt amperes and things like that. So that those have been addressed. And there was one issue on the investment schedule for Form 2, which has missing a dimension. So that's been added back in 2022 taxonomy as well. So those form for that schedule for the Form 2 then will replicate the Form 1. So those are kind of some of the issues that the 2022 taxonomy, the 2022 taxonomy will address. So that should be available early next year, and so then folks can file. If you want to start getting your annual filing ready, it'd be fine to do it with the 2021, and then just basically flip it to the 2022 when you're ready to file and when that's been released. And that taxonomy will be available for all forms, so that you would expect to use that no matter what type of form you are filing. Okay, could we go to the next slide, please, Michelle? As part of this process, the Ferc has gone back for the last 10 years, back to 2011, and has updated and basically migrated the data for each of the forms into an Xbrl format. So this is 10 years of history that they've gone back through. Now, it's really a best estimation. I think the main reason that we're bringing this up is don't take those prior year filings, update them to the next year, and then file them. There are a number of changes there's a number of reasons why that won't work, and just go through those just so everyone's clear on what that migrated data looks like. And it was the data was obviously that data was available in the past in the Visual FoxPro database. However, that data really is no longer going to be accessible as that platform has been, basically discontinued from Microsoft. So they wanted to make sure that data was still available. So they've converted it, and they've converted it to be compatible with the 2021 taxonomy. So all that data will be there, and it will be available for folks to use. And we'll talk about how you can use that in a minute. So the expectation is that historical data will be used by data analytics providers. Also, the regulators will be able to use it, and then also the utilities and the Ferc filers can use it. So you can go back and prepare historical analysis if you want to as well. So all that data the intention is that it's available for everyone. And as we mentioned earlier, it was a best estimate to try and collect that data and make it compatible with data going forward. So we'll just talk about some of the issues with that data, just so everyone's aware of it. And some of the things that were wrong and are being fixed. The first one is the balance sheet for Form 6. There was data missing from that. So that data is actually being regenerated by the Ferc. So the original submission of that data, if you've taken it, you may want to come back when they resubmit it and pull that data down. I know we've been pulling all this data down. And so for the Form 6, we're just holding off on getting the balance sheet data at the moment until that's been updated. Another thing just to be aware of, and this probably doesn't affect very much, but the entity identifier scheme is different. That was updated in the Ferc filer manual, basically to say it was in ferc.gov namespace or ferc.gov scheme. The migrated data has an Xbrl.org scheme for it. It's still the same number. The CID is still the same. It's just the scheme is different. So if you see that and you see, oh, why is this different? There's no good reason for it, other than that was decided to update that later. But all the migrated data, they didn't go back and change that. And I talked about this a little bit before. Form 2 cash flow. Financing adjustment that has the wrong sign in the historical data. So the Ferc is looking at whether it's worth fixing that. That would have fixed I think it affects like 69 filings. So that there's a couple of like annoying little things like this where the signs didn't flip properly because the taxonomy was wrong. It kind of went the wrong way around. So I know for the data we'll load, if anyone is looking at this data or thinking of redistributing this data, I just want to bring this to people's attention. So if you want more questions about it, we can certainly go through that. And it's systematic, so you can basically update that relatively quickly and get it correctly. There are a couple of schedules where some data was missing. It was, in some cases, the data wasn't mapped correctly. So in one case of that was the schedule 272. And so I know for the data we're loading, we plan to resolve all those issues. But if anyone wants to be aware, if you've got more questions about that, I'm more than happy to reach out to us and answer those. So we go to the next slide, please, Michelle. So if you take, and we've had a number of questions about this, people have taken the historical data filings and they've tried to validate them, and they're going to get errors, and you will get errors for those. There's a couple of reasons for this. There were errors in the original filings. The data that was originally filed was basically taken and just converted. So if there were mistakes in that data, those mistakes will just follow through. So you're going to get errors in the original filing anyway. Two, the other reason that you're going to get errors is a number of the schedules were very free form, and the instructions required that you'd put the data and then provide subtotals based on certain classifications, and then roll it down to a total. Now, where those subtotals were in the schedule was never predefined. It wasn't necessarily on any given row. And also there was no standard way to identify what a subtotal was. So as part of the data conversion on these schedules, a lot of this data was just converted just as straight. We're just going to convert all the data. We're going to provide the total. But if you went back and you added up those values, they're going to include the subtotal. So if you go back and reform the calcs, the value versus the calculated value will be double that of what the total is, because the subtotals are included. That it was just decided that it was really going to be very, very difficult to go and eliminate all those subtotals. So they were all just converted as single rows. So just if you do try to run validations on historical filings and you get errors and you wonder why, that's why. It doesn't necessarily mean there were errors in those filings in the past. It just means that the data associated with those filings couldn't be converted in a way because there just wasn't enough detail in the original files submitted to get that. So if you're preparing an Xbrl form and you want to use data from prior, there's nothing to stop you from using that, but just be aware you may have to do a little bit of cleanup on it. If you want to use it as a starting point, there's nothing wrong with that, but remember you're going to have to change the entity schemas on it, and you want to run it through the validations and clean up any issues. In the historical filings as well, when you render those in a number of the schedules, it'll put a title over it saying historical data. So when you render that data going forward, it'll be a lot more structured. So when in a number of the schedules, the instructions asked you to classify data by certain subtotals or break them down into roll forwards of certain accounts. In the updated Xbrl forms, that's a lot more structured, so that makes it kind of, instructions are clearer and it allows you to follow those instructions in more detail. One of the historical reasons that was not done in the past was because it was too difficult to update the VFP, and VFP program didn't really support doing it. So, and it was very difficult to maintain. So as a result, a lot of the structure in the data was just basically being requested in the form instructions. So what has happened with the move to Xbrl is those form instructions are basically provided additional metadata so that you can represent that data and make it very clear what subtotals are and what class, what's a roll forward of the data, etc. Okay, let's see the next slide. I think Michelle has some CPE questions. So I'll hand it back to you, Michelle, for those.
Great, thanks a lot, Campbell. Yeah, I'm going to bring up a couple of poll questions. And okay, so again, if you're getting CPE credit, please make sure to respond to these questions. So the first one we have is, rendering your Xbrl formatted Ferc form is the best checking tool for issuers to look for which one? That totals and You know what? I apologize. I think these polls are in the wrong order. Let me just end this one for a second. I just want to bring up a different poll. Apologies. All right, we're going to start with this one instead. Okay, so when should filers use the currently available Ferc 2021 taxonomy? Should it be for 2021 year-end annual forms, for 2021 quarterly forms, or for 2022 quarterly forms? So just take a look at the answers and make sure that you click on the answer that you think best addresses that question. Okay, we'll take another 30 seconds or so here. Okay, just another 15 seconds. Okay, we're going to close down this poll. And the correct answer to that question is for 2021 quarterlies. Okay, we're going to take one more poll right now. Make sure I've got the right one up here. Okay, which of the following are issues with historical filings that Ferc has converted to Xbrl? So is it that there's only 1 year of data currently available? Is it response number 2, the balance sheets are missing for all form types? Or is it response number 3, the balance sheet in Form 6 has errors? Okay, just take about another 30 seconds here. Another 15 seconds. Okay, we're going to close down the poll, and the correct answer is the balance sheet in Form 6 has errors. Okay, great. Thank you for responding to the polls. And I'm going to turn it back over to Campbell.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So we're just going to do a demo on how to get the Ferc data. So let's I'll share my screen here. So this is coming up. So Ferc has made available on their website a location where you can come and download this file, this data, and I'll just show you where that is. So this is on the ferc.gov website under the eForms refresh. And so the data is available here, and you can see these are zip files. And each of these zip files basically just contains all of the Xbrl files by year. So all of this data, and if it spreads over 2 in some cases, is available. So you can download. This is the original Xbrl files. So you can download those and then you can render them. We have a rendering application on our website. We'll talk about it in a minute. And then you can, then using this, you can basically go back and download these filings by form and then pull up your old filings if you're interested in getting those. This is really being made available for data analysts, so they can take this data and they can load it up and they have a record of it. So that data is there, and that's available. The other thing that is available as well is as data is filed, they are making that available via an RSS feed. So as soon as you file with the FERC, that is updated. I put it in here. So this basically is the Xbrl filing submitted to FERC, and this is the RSS feed. So you can see these as they came in, and these guys have been submitting some filings. So we just can get those via the feed. The address for the feed, we're actually, if you go back to the slides, I'm going to stop sharing, Michelle, if you want to go back to the slides. Let's walk through where you can get that from.
Sure, hang on just a minute here. I'm going to share my screen.
So they have put up there's something called an RSS feed, and this basically, as filings are made, you can see these. So, and we're putting the slides. I think we're going to make the slides available, right?
Yes.
Link there. So if you wanted to see what's coming, you can do that. You go to the next slide, Michelle. So here you can see this is the link. I just loaded an extension of my browser, and it just shows you the filings that have been made. The system is live, so make sure if you're doing a test submission, there's a big button there that says test. Make sure you click that, and so you've got some filings come in, and they have to go back and clear these out, which were clearly not meant to be submitted as real filings. So remember to click the test button there. And as you and when this data becomes available, that RSS feed includes something called the filing ID, which you need to be able to get back to the original filing if you're using this data, the form name, what period, the actual original Xbrl file that was submitted, the year, the CID, and the submitted date. Two eyes in there. So anyway, so that is that basically allows you to track what filing's been made. So if you wanted to check that a filing's been made, you can go and look at that RSS feed. And then you can, and this is so people can log that so they can know in real time who's filed. You go to the next slide. The other thing is we're doing is all that data that you saw on the FERC website, we're taking that and we are loading that into our database as well. So if you're an Xbrl member, that would be available to you. So you can come and look at that data. We have an Excel add-in, so you can look at it. And it's also going to be available in our SQL database. So we're loading all the historical data, and then we're going to read that RSS feed, and as companies file on the RSS feed, we'll be adding those filings in as well. So we should be able to upload those in real time. And this will just be accessible for those who are familiar. We do that for the SEC. So if you file, so that data will be available as well with the SEC data that's being filed. So if you want to reconcile between the filings, you'll be able to do that. We're not normalizing that data. We're not normalizing between the CID and the CIK in a programmatic way. That would be up to you to do if you wanted to go and compare, what you'd reported in your SEC filing versus what you reported in your FERC filing. But you can do that if you felt inclined to. I know that the FERC audit group, they do that, so you may want to have a look at that as well, just as a double check. Anyway, that option would be available if you're thinking of how can I use this data. If you go to the next slide, please, Michelle.
Campbell, we have, as we move to the next slide, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
I'm going to take a couple of questions here. The first is, what is the difference between filing ID and CID?
So the filing ID is you can think of this as just like this is what it is. It's an internal identifier number that the FERC assigns to the filing, which uniquely identifies that filing. So if you look in the RSS feed, there's a URL that they make available to the filing. So if someone wants to come and get the filing that was made, you have to include that filing ID in that path. So you need the filing ID to be able to find the file on the web. It's the equivalent in SEC terms of the filing accession number. So that's what that filing identifier is. It identifies the filing, whereas the CID identifies the filer.
Okay, and then we have another question. If my company already has a CID, do I still need to create a GID for Xbrl submission?
I don't believe so, but I'll find out about that.
Okay, Okay, so we'll check in on that. Okay, and then one last question before we move on. According to current FERC Form 6 instructions, the date of report at the top of each page is applicable only for resubmissions. However, according to the service provider we engaged, going forward, we will need to fill this date of report even for regular filings, for instance, with no resubmissions. Otherwise, we'll get a validation error. They're asking for a confirmation on that. That may be, we may need to come back to them on that as well.
The date of report. I think the filing agent's correct there. The date of submission, the date of the report is required. They use that just as the. I see your point, and I can go back to the FERC and ask them about that. So what you're saying is the date of report would only ever be filed on the resubmission. At the moment, the way that they've currently implemented it, the date of the report is required on the date of the original submission as well. There is a validation rule that validates that, so that the filing agent is correct. If you try and submit without the date of report, then it will give you an error.
Okay, so we'll check in on the second question from
yeah, but that may be a question to go back to the FERC, and maybe that's maybe that submission, that validation rule should be revised not to include that, but we can check with them. But they are correct. The validation rule does work that way. If you don't have the date of report, if the date of the report is missing, it will flag.
Okay. Okay, and just a reminder to everybody, please, if you do have questions, please click on the Q&A and you can send your questions and we'll be happy to take them. Okay, I'm gonna turn it back over to you, Campbell.
All right, so you can check your filing. We've put up on our website, we've taken the validation rules just to make it easier for folks. If they want to check a filing, they can do that. So if you go to the Xbrl US website, we have a couple of different things you can do. And that one of these boxes there, I think it's under the tools and instructions, allows you to basically be able to check your filing, create a rendering, and do a number of other things. So Michelle, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the first thing we're just going to go through is the rendering for review. We've put up on our website, if you click on that link, it'll give you the option if you wanted to, if you provide your Xbrl filing, you can then render it. This just can be useful. If you want to go back and look at a historical filing, you want to render it, then you can. It also means that you can also render a single schedule if you want to look at it and see what it looks like and make sure it's filled out properly. Now, and basically what this is doing is when it renders it, it just renders it in what's called to an inline Xbrl format. And this is what the FERC is going to do. And so then basically we've just taken the FERC code that they've published and we're just basically rendering it out. There are different renderings for different, at the moment, this is not an issue because there's only the 2021 taxonomy. But as we go forward, there is different rendering, could be associated with different taxonomies. So for example, if they make changes to the form or they want to show it differently, then they can do that. So then we'll support that in the future as well. So if they want to, the rendering for the 2022 taxonomy is going to be different than the rendering for the 2021 taxonomy, just to let you know that. So basically this is helpful so you can check that they got the order right, the values appear in the correct column, and check that the values are based on you got the right report year and period. Some of the errors that we've seen is people will not update the periods and they got the wrong data in the wrong period. The way the renderer works, it goes and reads the data and it says, okay, it's for this period, and it'll put it in that column. It basically gets the data. It's like a big, like a big template, and it drops all the data in and it goes into the places where it's supposed to go. So if you tag the data wrong, then it's not going to show up on the form. Now, in some cases, and this is an error, but you shouldn't try and do that, but we've seen a lot of people doing this, is if you duplicate the data in your filing, if you have you report the same value multiple times, generally it should be fine. But in some cases, if you put different values in there for the same value, the renderer is just going to put in the first one it sees. So that actually will give you, you can render the stuff if you have errors, but if you've got errors in your filing, then the rendering could become unreliable and inconsistent. So just to give you an example of that. So let's say in this filing here, you had depreciation, but you tagged the value for depreciation with different values for the same period. And you ran a validation rule that say you've tagged this value more than once and you've given it different values, which is the right one. The renderer, when it comes through, is just going to basically put in there the first one it finds. If you have a second one, it's going to ignore it. So, however, if you re-render it, then it's going to do the same thing. It's going to find the first one it finds. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same value. So, if you're going to render this and you have validation errors, and particularly if you've got the same facts are in there twice, just be a little bit careful about that. Obviously, you're not going to file with validation errors, so it's not going to be an issue at the end of the day. But a lot of times you're going to render it, see if it looks right, make changes, render it, see if it looks right. So just want to make everyone aware of that. Let's go to the next slide. So we've put this up, made this available on our website, so you can download. If you take a filing, you can load it up to the website. This is just, you load the Xbrl file up. You can see it on the right. You choose the file, then you select the form type. Very important you get that right. Don't try and upload a form 1 and try and render it with a form 2 schedule. It's not going to work. Or it's an annual filing. You're going to pick an annual filing, and then we give you the option. You can render the whole thing, which you probably don't want to do because it's just a bit time consuming, but the point of this was to make it easy so you could just render a single schedule and then you could check it. You can render the whole thing if you want, but you might want to go and get a coffee, but it's going to take a few minutes. So then this will basically render it, and then it'll download as an HTML file so that you can look it up. We just made this available so it makes it easier to check. And as Ferc comes out with any updates to the renderer, we're going to upload those we have a GitHub site that we're making those available so vendors can use it and pull down and run from those if they can't get it from the Ferc quickly enough, and then we're going to upload it in this website so you can render those as well. So you go to the next slide, Michelle. So the render, I'll just share my screen. I'll just show you where it is on the website. And I'll just show you an example. So if you go to the Xbrl US website, we just have this here. And there's filers. You go to Ferc reporting, tools and instructions. And then you can choose the file here, and you can pull what file you want to render. For example, I don't know, whatever you want to do. I down sort of these 2011 ones, and then you might say, okay, I want to do the form 1, and I want to do whatever. I could do an individual schedule, or I could do the whole thing if I wanted. I did one earlier, and then you can submit it, and it'll run. I did one earlier I think it was for Atlantic. And so then this just goes out and renders it. This is for the 2011 filing. So this is just rendering a filing from 10 years ago. So you can do that, and that's available on the website. So you can render these forms if you want to. So if you want to look at what they look like, and you'll see on these, in particular, this is like a historical filing that's rendered. There are some things that are included in here. I'll just give you an example. If you see them, what they mean. Maybe there isn't. There are footnotes in here which are just rendered automatically, where data was changed. For example, like dates on the historical filings. If it was 2000 and a filing for 2056 in the VFP, it may have had a value of 56. So you may not get those correctly. So what this is doing is making it'll put a footnote in for it. Just find an example of those. And this one, yeah, and it tells you either they had a duplicate fact, another paid in cap. It'll just give you notes that it ran into. If it had to convert a date that it didn't know what to do, it'll put a footnote in there. It says it converted this date. If it was 2056 or 1956, whatever it had to do. So anyway, that's how this works. The other thing we have is business rules. So I'll go back to the slides and we'll talk about those, and then we'll show you how you can validate those on the website. So I'm just going to stop sharing. All right, so the other thing is you can run the Ferc business rules. So this is just really that you've got, the main idea for this, and these rules are put in is because with Xbrl, you kind of have it's pretty much an open slate. So you want to make sure that you can basically control for that. So there are a lot of checks put in just to make it easier for people to get the stuff right, so they're not accidentally submitting stuff incorrectly. It checks that you got things in the right periods. And make sure that you're not putting duplicate facts in with different values. Also does checks to make sure they've got all the mandatory fields that you need to be filled out. That you have the right periods on stuff so that you're not putting instances in the income statement and vice versa on the balance sheet. Confirm that subtotals are mathematically correct. There are a number of schedules where you'll have subtotals, and it might subtotal up types of taxes, or it might subtotal up things by state. So the rules will check that. You have roll forwards, it'll check that those roll forwards are correct. So there's actually quite a lot of validation that goes on in these schedules. And this is a lot more than there was in the original VFP. It's also checking for signage errors, and it's also checking for things like that you've used the correct units in the data as well. And this is one thing you'll probably notice with the forms is in a number of cases, this is one of the issues with the historical data. It wasn't necessarily clear what the unit was when things were being reported. So in Xbrl, it's much more specific about this is the unit. So you got to make sure that you put the right unit in. And then depending on the disclosures, sometimes you have choice about which unit you can use, but generally the units are defined by the form. So you've got to make sure that you're actually putting the correct unit in. So this shows an example of the errors that will come back. So you can see here, this is reporting that, this one can't have a negative value. For some reason, they put a negative value in. And so this is basically reporting that same error 3 times, right? For whatever reason, maybe they've reported it for different periods or whatever. The rules themselves will basically tell you the structure of this is the rule reference. It'll say F1 all 11. Generally, the first part of it tells you what form it is. You probably know that. The second part is going to tell you the schedule number. In this case, there are some rules called all, which basically apply over all the schedules. But you'll see in this a lot of cases, it'll reference the actual schedule number, that third number, that Ferc form 1, where it's got all that will, in most cases, will represent the actual schedule number. So then you know where to go and look for that error. And then you can do a find as well on that particular value and then find it in the filing. If you think there's more information that should be included in the errors, please let us know, and we can go back to Ferc and say, look, maybe you need more detail so you can help find the error or understand what the issue actually means. So that would be good feedback as well if you're running these and the validation rules don't make sense. Okay, so that's how the validation rules work. Here, the next slide. So on the website, we just basically have this. You can choose the filing, and then you check the filing, and then it'll run off and it'll run the validation rules, and then they'll come back in the format that was in the slide above. So that's pretty straightforward, and then you should be able to go through and fix any issues that are identified. The next slide, please, Michelle. The other thing just to be aware of, and this is kind of the Ferc was late in releasing this was the Ferc filer manual rules. For those of you who are familiar with SEC filing, this is kind of similar to the SEC filer manual. And what these rules do, they're not really on the content of the filing, they're really more on what's in the filing that could screw up the filing system. So you'll see they come back with a security vulnerability error. It may not really be a security vulnerability, but it potentially could lead to one. So these basically are looking for things like malicious code that might be in the filing, or control characters which may be in the filing, which could cause problems. So, and these rules basically mirror the rules that the SEC has. They don't have as many rules as the SEC, but they basically, the numbering system is, they borrowed the numbering system from the SEC, so that it makes it easier for the filing agents if they're writing software for it, that, if they know that number, that those numbers correspond to the SEC. So anyone who's familiar with SEC reporting, this should make total sense for you. You don't have to go and learn a whole bunch of new codes for it. And at the same time, then the software that they've got should be easily amended to support it as well, because it's basically it's looking for exactly the same thing. And the main intent of this is to look for invalid characters, look for invalid HTML. So for example, as part of the filings, you can actually submit HTML, as if you want to make your footnotes or a text disclosure look pretty, you can put HTML in there. So they don't want people putting in like a form, so you can actually submit data in your filing if someone's looking at it. So that basically prevents certain tags from being used. It also prevents unauthorized JavaScript from being added in there, and any other embedded code, which in theory could be put into the file and submitted. So that's what these rules are looking for. So if you have any of these errors, then they are actually described in the Ferc filing manual, which is on their website. So we go to the next slide. I think there's some examples of this. So this is, some of you may have seen this. This is what it will look like when you go to do a filing. It'll come up and it'll say it contains security vulnerabilities. That's probably, don't panic when you see that, because it's not really a security vulnerability. It potentially could lead to a security vulnerability for the Ferc. And it gives you in sections 4 and 6 of the filing manual, and it has some error numbers. And then in the Ferc filing manual, it basically describes what those errors are. So you should be able to resolve them. And most of them are going to be pretty straightforward. We've had a few people come back to this and what are these? Most of the time, there's some invalid characters in the filing, and so it's just a matter of going through and finding and replacing those. Okay, so we go to the next slide, Michelle. I got some examples, I think. Yeah, so these rules can be checked prior to submission using one of the following tools. Validation checks provided by the vendor, and most of them should provide for that. There is some software, open source software available, and they've made a module available, and this is the same module that Ferc uses because they use Xbrl. So then that can be, that you can use that software and you can run it. And we're going to make that available on our website as well. So if you want to run it, if you're not sure, if you get that error, you can run it through our filing at our website, and it'll tell you exactly what those errors are. So if you go to the next slide, Michelle. So here's an example. So in this case, there's disallowed characters. And it tells you what the character is, and it has a Unicode code for it, which you probably don't care about. But in this case, it's got the cross sign in there, which then they're not allowing. So then basically you've got to go back and use a different character. There's a character, you can use the same character, but that same character can be represented multiple ways depending on the software that was used to implement it. So it's basically asking you can't use that particular one. So, and these are the rules that Xbrl will show you back, and we're going to show the same ones as well. So I'll give you a bit more detail on what the error is rather than giving you a number, so that you can go back and fix those. But your filing vendor, the software vendor, if you're using a software vendor, they should be able to help you with that as well. I was going to do a demo of this. So this is just really, I'm just going to show you where it is on the website, so you know how to do it. Share my screen again. So you can choose the filing. Pick one of these old ones. And then this will just go away and it's just going to run it. And then it'll just, that's pretty much all it is. I haven't tried running this one before. This is from 2011. I hope it works. I'm sure it will. It can take, there's a lot of rules that this runs on a Form 1 because it's quite a big filing. So normally it'll probably, you got to wait a little bit. So it may take like 30 seconds or so to run. And then it'll come back if there's any errors in the filing. This is a migrated data filing, so I'd be surprised if they're. But anyway, so that's going to go away and it'll run, and then it'll just bring back the results like we saw on the other slide. Things to be aware of. If there are, this will also check if there are Xbrl errors in the filing too. So there could be. So here we go. So this is basically things won't sum, and this is to be, you know, the signs are the wrong way around, and this could have been because they were entered incorrectly in the original filing. This doesn't have the officer certification on it, which couldn't be done. And so then there's a difference here on the unappropriated retained earnings. So this is migrated data. There may be many reasons for this, and normally. The main reason for this, as we mentioned, in the historical filings, you're going to see these errors because the calculations, in some cases, they could have been wrong in the original filing, or there was a breakdown across multiple rows, and we weren't sure what those were in the original filing. So it only had 3, so it's not too bad given how much is in the Form 1. But anyway, then you can go through and then you can resolve those particular issues. That's how you do it. So Michelle, if you could bring back up the slides, please. So we've put some other tools up as well. We've got a lot of questions over the last 3 months. And so we've been trying to document those questions and how you should handle them and try and capture all that information. So the questions are good. So we've put some some manuals for each form together. So you get the next slide, Michelle, and this is under the tools and stuff. So this is instructions and mapping. So there's a couple of things here which I think we've talked about in the past, but we're constantly updating this. So this, if you've got like the balance sheet, as we see issues come in and people ask questions, we try to provide guidance on that and how you would tag this and what you do in these different situations. There were some good questions that came in the other day about a very specific schedule and how you split it up and how you do the states and the taxes. And it wasn't really clear from the schedule. So we've gone through and basically tried to document that and make it clearer. At the same time, we've asked the Ferc to update their sample instances so that then the examples are better. Sometimes the sample instances aren't necessarily the best in terms of getting stuff, making it crystal clear about how you should tag something. So if you do see something there, you should send an email to the eForms refresh and ask them to update the sample instance so it reflects that. And let us know as well, and then we can research it and we can add some documentation to some of these instructions that we have available on the website. And generally those instructions, like for the Form 1 or the Form 2, still working on Form 6, we'll basically go through every single schedule and indicate what dimensions you should use and how you should use them and what validations are running on it. So get the next slide, please, Michelle.
Sure, and Campbell, we do have a question that came in that you might want to respond to. This is a question concerning the current version of the Ferc taxonomy does not have a concept associated with a debit to the retained earnings in account 439. It only has a concept associated with a credit to the account, which forces filers to enter debit amounts as opposite balances or errors will be present. Given there is one line for debit amounts and one line for credit amounts on page 118 of Form 2 or 3Q, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that there aren't 2 separate concepts, one for debit and one for credit in the taxonomy. Is this something the Ferc might address in the 2022 taxonomy? Now, this is pretty specific. I don't know if you have an answer to this, but if not, we can certainly research.
I don't know if anyone's brought this up. I haven't seen this before, but I'm going to bring that up to them. But if this is, if this is the case, there should either be some guidance given on this, on how to deal with it, or B, have another element added for it.
So that's something we can raise with the FERC then, and we'll try to get back to Sandra on that.
Yeah, just if you could just make a copy of that issue, and I'll send an email to them and ask them about it, and then see if we can get that addressed. But that would be, but that's good feedback. So if we can get that, then we can go back and get it addressed. And we would hopefully that if these issues come out through the quarterly filings, we can get it all addressed in the 2002, plus some guidance on what you should do in that case and how you deal with it.
Right. So thank you, Sandra. That's all the questions right now. Campbell, go ahead with mapping.
Speaking of retained earnings, this is giving an example of, maybe she saw this, retained earnings credit. So yeah, on this, this is basically telling you what was the row number in the original form, rows 4 through 8 in column D. So you can do adjustments to retained earnings credit. So these items would then, it just basically tells you that row on that schedule, on that column, should be tagged with the element adjustments to retained earnings credit, and it should be prior, and it should be tagged with the retained earnings adjustment axes. And then you can put multiple. You can put multiple rows. In fact, you can do more than 4 to 8. That was like an open number of rows, and this is just saying you can basically you can create as many as you like now, which is different from before, and the same for the current. And so then it also gives you the primary account. So you basically have 3 data elements here: the current period, the prior period, and the account affected. So basically you can include 4, 5, 6, you can include a lot more, but it's basically telling you the rows, that how you would have tagged them before, and where you should do the elements. So we've created this mapping for every single schedule. So it basically tells you, you can use this as a mapping, so you can look up, if I've got this row, this column, what is the element should be used, and what dimension should be used, and what period should be used for that value. So this can be quite helpful to basically, if you have a question about it, you can just use this as a reference. All right, so I think you have some CPE questions.
Yes, we do. Yeah, thank you, Campbell. So we're going to take 2 more CPE questions. And so if you just pay attention to your screen here. Okay, so this next question is, FERC business rules are used to check for which of the following? Is it response number 1, confirmation that totals and subtotals are mathematically correct? Is it response number 2, to prevent submissions that have invalid characters? Or response number 3, to prevent submissions that have redundant contexts? So we'll take about another 30 seconds on this question. And again, please be sure to respond if you want to get CPE credit. And I'll give you the correct answer at the end. Okay, I'm going to close down the poll now. And the correct answer to that is to confirm that totals and subtotals are mathematically correct. Okay, so let's go to our last poll question. Okay, rendering your Xbrl formatted Ferc form, make sure I have the right one here, yeah, is the best checking tool for issuers to look for that totals and subtotals are mathematically correct. Okay, this is, I apologize, I think this is the wrong poll question. Nope, it's the correct poll question. Okay, so rendering your Xbrl formatted Ferc form is the best checking tool for issuers to look for that totals and subtotals are mathematically correct, that invalid HTML is included in footnotes and text blocks, or that ordering of certain items like director name is accurate. So please respond to the question. Okay, we'll give it another few seconds. Let me just relaunch this poll because I'm not sure. Apologies, I'm relaunching this poll. So if you could please take a look at this again and respond again. Okay, so we'll take about another 30 seconds here. And apologies for my technical problems with the poll questions today. Just like another 20 seconds. Okay, I'm going to close down the poll. 2 seconds here. Okay, and the correct answer is the ordering of certain items. So thank you again for responding to the polls. And I'm going to move on to our last slide here. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and thanks to Campbell Pride very much for all the feedback and the updates on what's going on with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and also thank you for the questions. If you do have more questions, specific issues like the ones that were raised, those are great. We'd love to bring them back to the FERC and make sure that the taxonomy that comes out next year is in great working order. And I just want to let you know about some upcoming events that we have, which are for FERC filers, for SEC filers, for all kinds of organizations. We have a webinar coming up next week on working with SEC data for analysts, and it's going to be Monday, October 25th. This session, we're going to talk about how to work with Xbrl content, so like taxonomies, data, instance documents, and so it'll be a really interesting session, particularly for those of you who are kind of data geeks and data scientist types and analysts. So please join us for that one. And again, it's a free program. And then we have our big investor forum on November 10th, Thursday, November 10th. It's the Xbrl US Investor Forum, Data That Delivers. And we're really excited about having keynote speakers, the Commissioner Caroline Crenshaw from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We also have another keynote speaker, Independent Corporate Board Director and former FASB Chair, Leslie Seidman. So that's going to be a really interesting program. We're going to be providing a lot of case studies about how people are using Xbrl data today to transform the way they can do analysis. So thanks again for attending. We will be sending out the replay link for the program tomorrow, along with some information about how you can access some of the tools that were demonstrated today. So thanks again, and hope to see you in future webinars.